Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's economics lesson. My name is Mr. Perry. This lesson is brought to you by the Northern Cape Department of Education in collaboration with Pagama Research and Development. Good day again, grade 12. So today, our focus area will be economic issues. Our topic is inflation. Subtopic is the causes of inflation. So this is the second part of our inflation. We've already covered the types of inflation. Now we're moving to the causes of inflation. By the end of the lesson, the learners will be able to briefly compare the monetarist and the Keynesian explanation of inflation, discuss the causes of demand pull inflation, discuss the causes of cost push inflation. This information is from your examination guideline, page 31. So our aim today is to discuss the causes of inflation, since we've learned the types of inflation and how to measure the inflation. Today we are moving to looking at the causes. What causes inflation? So the first thing will be comparing the explanation of the monetarist and the Keynesian. Then we look at the demand pull inflation, then the cost push inflation. Right, so your pre-knowledge from the previous lesson, we examined ways to measure inflation. We spoke of the different types of inflation. Those were your hyperinflation, stagflation, core inflation, CPIX. Those were the types of inflation that we mentioned on the previous lesson. How to measure inflation, we looked at indexes and the inflation target and weighting as a way of measuring inflation. Right, so grade 12, we are going to do a baseline activity as an icebreaker for you to answer. The question is, describe the two methods that government can use to measure inflation. I'll give you 5 minutes to complete this mini activity, then we'll look at the answers. Right, grade 12, your 5 minutes is done. Let's look at the possible answers. Right, so the question was asking you to describe two methods that the government can use to measure inflation. So you can look at the indexes, because the ways of measuring inflation, you have indexes, you have weighting, and you also have the inflation rate, where you are using the CPI to calculate inflation rate. So let's look at the possible answer for 8 marks. Consumer price indexes, it measures changes in the cost of the basket of goods consumed by household. The advantage of this, it includes its relevancy to consumers, but it may not capture all the expenditure patterns. So the first one that we use, part of the indexes, is your consumer price indexes, which measures what? The cost of basket of goods and services. So we mentioned on the last lesson that on this CPI, we look at the relevancy of the product before we can calculate the inflation, the relevancy according to the income level of consumers. And then you can mention the producer price indexes. It tracks the changes in prices received by producers. So this one, it measures, you can also say it measures the cost of production. Remember, the PPI, it measures the cost of production when the goods are leaving the factory or when goods are entering South Africa, imported goods. Then that's when we calculate the PPI. It helps us to anticipate future prices changes, but may not reflect consumer prices accurately. So with PPI, it helps us to do what? To predict the future prices. So PPI, it can be a leading indicator for CPI. So if the prices of goods and service price of goods when they are produced are increasing, then we can say that we may have inflation. Consumer price index will also increase because the cost of production is high, then producers may charge higher price. All right, let's look at today's terminology. The first one is monetarist. So the monetarist theory, it is not new information. We've learned that when we are doing our macroeconomics. You learn that there is monetarist theory and there is Keynesian theory. The monetary theory is associated with economists like Milton Friedman, emphasizes the role of money supply in influencing the economic activity, that controlling the growth rate of money is crucial for managing inflation and promoting stable economic growth. And then you have the Keynesian theory, developed by John Maynard Keynes, argues for the government intervention in the economy through fiscal to manage aggregate demand. So when you look at the two theorists, the monetarist theory, we know that is the one that say government should not intervene, because government, when we did business cycle, we learned that government intervention is the one that causes fluctuation within our business cycle. However, Keynesian was saying something else. Keynesian was saying government intervention will smoothen the fluctuations that are existing already. So this is two economics. The one has the other belief, the other one has the other belief that, but then the issue here is the government intervention. The monetarists believe that government intervening sometimes is the one that creates a fluctuation. When government increases, for example, when government increases money supply, that may lead to so much money in circulation, then leading to inflation increasing. Then the Keynesian says, when government increases money supply, for example, that can stimulate aggregate demand and people can be hired, meaning they are solving the problem of your depression. When the economy is depressed, then we can stimulate the economy. So these two theories, let's just continue here with the Keynesian. It suggests that during economic downswing or downturns, government spending and tax cuts can stimulate the demand, reduce unemployment, and stabilize the economy. So the two differences here is that government controlling in the Keynesian theory, it is good, and then the monetarists somehow criticize that. Right, so you have the monetarist and the Keynesian explanation of inflation. A monetarist explanation, the quantity theory of money. So the monetarists adhere to the quantity theory of money, which state that inflation is primarily caused by an increase in the supply of money in the economy. So the monetarists will say that the inflation is caused by too much money in the economy. The bank that print money, for example, our Reserve Bank, if the Reserve Bank is printing more money, we know we always ask the question why we are not printing all the money in the world. Why are we having too much debt as a country? Why there's no money? Why is there budget deficit? Why can't we print money? Because we are printing our own currency. Then the answer will always be our money will lose value. Too much money in circulation, then it will be oversupplied and it will lose value. However, when you look at the monetarist explanation here, saying that too much money is the one that will create inflation. Who's putting the money in circulation is the central bank of a country. This theory asserts that a direct and proportional relationship exists between changes in money supply and change in the price level. So the change in money supply, when there's too much money, the price level will also increase. Remember, too much money chasing few goods will lead to price increase. If you decide to say you're selling knickknacks in your school, and then the price of one packet is R1, and then by 9 a.m. they are all gone, you sold out. What you're going to do is that instead of you buying more packets, you're going to increase your prices because you see that the demand is high, there's too much money in the school chasing few goods. Then you can push your luck and sell at 150. And then if people are still buying, then that's become your price because of what? Too much money chasing few goods. All right, the role of central bank. Our central bank is the South African Reserve Bank. Monetarists advocate for central banks to control inflation by managing the growth rate of the money supply. So again, we're looking at the central bank not increasing the money supply. They argue that excessive growth in the money supply, not matched by the increase in production, will lead to inflation pressure in the economy. Right, let's look at the Keynesian explanation. So Keynesian explanation, we have the demand pull and the cost push. This is our main causes of inflation. So today, our main point of view here will be looking at the demand pull and the cost push inflation. Keynesians argue that inflation is primarily caused by excess demand in the economy and relative to its productive capacity. So the demand pull inflation, it means that there's excess more demand in the economy when we relate it to the supplier productive capacity. So there's more demand than production. That is the demand pull inflation. So sometimes inflation can be caused by what? Too much pressure from consumers as household having more money, and then our demand is high. However, the producers do not produce as much as we demand. When aggregate demand exceed the aggregate supply, so the total, remember the word aggregate is for total. So the total demand for goods and services exceed the aggregate, the total supply, which is the total production, then price will increase. That is the demand side. And then let's look at your cost push inflation. Keynesian also recognized cost push inflation where increase in the production cost, such as wages. Let's look at this grade 12. So the cost push, this one cost push, is a situation where there's an increase in the production cost. This increase in the production cost. Production is associated with the supply. So there's an increase in the supplier price. There's increase in the production cost, such as wages. Who's paying the wage is the producer, is the supplier. Or the prices of raw material to produce your key inputs, things that you need to produce, leads to a higher price. This can occur even without an increase in demand if production cost rises. So the cost push inflation is talking of the producer producing at a high cost of production. That will lead into what? Into prices being high. Because now you are producing at a high cost. Now you are also pushed, it's a cost push. The cost that you are having as a producer is pushing you in increasing prices. Again, just as a reminder, grade 12, inflation, this is a general increase in the price levels. So the cost push is when producers having to pay high wages. You're having your employee there bargaining, fighting, striking for more wages. Then you do what? You increase their wage. However, their productivity is still the same. They're still producing the number of a product that they were producing before. If they are producing, let's say a day, they are able to produce 50 loaf of bread at a wage of 40 rand an hour, then they are bargaining for more wage to 50 rand an hour, and they are still producing the same quantity, the same number. It means that the producer now has to pay more for the cost of production. However, productivity remained the same. So for the producer to remain with the same profit margins, the producer will do what? Will increase the price of the goods and services. Right, let's look at the aggregate demand. According to the Keynesian theory, changes in aggregate demand influenced by factors like consumer spending, investment, government expenditure, export, they play a crucial role in inflation pressure. So what's this? This is a C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Let's leave the M because the M is not there. So your aggregate demand, when you're speaking of demand pull inflation, we're talking about the spending of all the participants in the economy, consumers, investors, which is your businesses, government, and export as well. Export can lead to pressure if we are producing not only for these three participants, we are producing for the international market. These people, if they are demanding more from us, it may increase inflation. Export is good. We all agree export is good. It brings money within the economy. It increases our injections, and the money circulation becomes more. Our balance of payment, it balances. We may say that it can be positive where exports are more than import. However, if there's too much export, it means that now there's too much money coming into the economy, and this too much money can also lead to inflationary pressures. So all this aggregate demand, they may lead to a demand pull inflation, right? And then government explaining intervention. Canadian advocates for government intervention to manage inflation. We said the Canadian says things that are happening, they are happening because of the markets. Grade 12, I'm going to take you back to the exogenous and endogenous factors. Remember, the endogenous, we say things that are happening within the economy are from inside. So government needs to come and intervene and fix what is happening. So the same intervention that the Canadian is speaking of is the same in this is the beauty of economics, that the information just we don't change information, it's the same, just that now we're looking at a different unit. So the same information on endogenous and exogenous, you can link it to this explanation of inflation right now to say Canadian still says government should intervene to manage inflation by using what? Your fiscal policy, by using the monetary policy, right? So when we are having inflation, government can use fiscal policy through your government spending and taxation. And then they can use, our Reserve Bank can use the monetary policy by controlling interest rate and money supply, right? So that will regulate our aggregate demand and stabilize prices. Right, so grade 12, we're moving to the demand pull inflation. We've discussed the description of demand pull inflation, that there's too much money chasing few goods. When we explain it bookwise, we'll say the aggregate demand is more than the aggregate supply. So it's a situation where the aggregate demand is more than the aggregate supply. Right, aggregate demand rises more than the aggregate supply, causing an increase in the general price. So demand pull inflation, again, grade 12, if you look at your examination guideline, demand pull and cost push inflation, they are no longer essay questions. However, if you look at your previous question paper, you'll find that they were asked as long question, or they were asked under section C. It's no longer that case. Please look at your examination guideline. Our essays are no longer the causes of inflation. We have 2 essays in the unit. We are going to discuss that in the later stage, but this one is not a long question anymore. So you can only find it in your 8-mark question, in your data respond, in your section A, not as section C. Just take note of that when you are revising, and you see demand or cost push inflation on your previous question paper, they are no longer essays. Groups that are responsible for demand pull inflation. Remember, the demand pull inflation, it means that the demand rises more than the supply. So groups that are responsible is your aggregate demand, including consumers, household, businesses through investment, and government through government expenditure. Also exporters, foreign contributor, they further increase the demand for goods and services through increase in export. So that C plus G plus I plus X, if all of this is increasing, if the consumer spending increases, government expenditure increases, investment increases, your cost, capital formation increases, and the number of people buying from us increases, that may lead to what? Demand pull inflation. So the situation here is that the demanders are more than the supply. That is your demand pull inflation. Right, what causes the demand pull inflation? What causes demand being more than the supply? The reason the demand is more than the supply, the first one can be a decline in savings. If people decide to not save their money and spend their money. Remember, grade 12, when you did the multiplier, we have two things. This is the 100% money that we have. Out of this 100% money, we can use the S to spend. We can use the S to save. So we can save or spend. So if there's an increase in spending, we learned that the more the spending, the more the money multiplies. If we are spending, it means we save less. So if we are saving, it means that there's not much money in circulation. So, but if there is a decline inward in the marginal propensity to save, if the money that we save declines, we save less, it means the marginal propensity to consume will increase. When the marginal propensity to consume increases, there will be too much money. If savings habits are changed and consumers start spending their current and accumulated savings, growth in aggregate demand can outstrip growth in aggregate supply. If we save less, if people decide to take their accumulated saving money and their current income, they decide to spend it, then aggregate demand will grow further than the aggregate supply, leading to too much demand than the supply. Another thing is tax reduction. Tax reduction can lead to a situation where there's too much demand. If personal income tax is reduced, it means that there's more money available in our pockets. If they decrease payee, your personal income taxes decreases, it means that what you used to earn, now it becomes small because you are paying less taxes. Then if you are paying less tax, it means that there's more money available for you to spend. And then more money available for you to spend, it means that the aggregate demand will be more than the aggregate supply. The next one is the access to credit. If we are able to get credit, then we are going to spend. So all of these points are saying, why is there too much spending? Because we're saving less, that's why we're spending more. Because the tax is being reduced, that's why we're spending more. Our disposable income now is more, that's why we are spending more. Access to credit, now we are able to borrow money. That money that we are borrowing, we're not borrowing it to sit with it at home. We borrow the money to spend. Then consumption will increase. Aggregate demand will increase. Greater availability of consumer credit, which is your credit cards and whatsoever that we are using, and cheaper credit. Credit multiplier kicks in and more credit is created. So if interest rate is low, it means credit is cheaper. When the credit is cheaper, we borrow more because paying it back is not that expensive anymore. Then the more we borrow money, we spend, we increase our aggregate demand, then there will be too much demand more than supply. Right, so this is increased consumption by household. So the disposable income of household can increase at a faster rate than the supplier for the following reason. It is caused by either access to credit or lower interest rate, which make credit cheaper. With credit being cheaper, household will borrow more. Lack of savings. Consumer may spend their entire income and fail to save. Then reduction in taxes. If government decides to reduce personal income tax, consumer will use extra money to buy more goods and services. So grade 12, this is just the repetition, but here now we're putting it in a perspective to look at what about savings. There's a lack of savings, reduction in taxation for consumers. Now we're only looking at the household. Households are able to get what? Credit, and then all of these things will increase consumption by household. And then we look at investment. Why are we doing this? We're still looking at the C plus I plus G plus X, which is your total aggregate. Whenever we're talking about GDP as the expenditure method, spending, this is what we're talking about. Consumption by household, investment by businesses, government expenditure, and export earnings. So let's look at investment as one of the reasons we may have demand pull inflation. Remember, grade 12, businesses are also consumers. So we learned this in EMS that businesses can also be consumers, because for you to produce, you need to buy. When you buy, you are a consumer. So investment can create a situation where it creates, not it can, investment create a situation where there's too much demand, because for you to produce here as an investor, you need to consume. So businesses are also consumers. So a reduction in interest rate will encourage firms to expand their operation. When they are expanding their operation, they will do what? They will be buying. So they need to buy the raw material, they need to hire more people have more money, then that may lead to inflation. So reduction in interest rate, it means access to what? Access to credit. So they have an access to credit, they expand their businesses, they increase aggregate demand. Businesses invest more, and this may lead to increase in the demand for goods and services that are part of the investment, e.g., new buildings, cement, bricks, labor. So all these things, to build your new industry or to expand the industry, you need to buy all of these things. These things, let's look at bricks, cement. You find them where? In a product market. So you go to the product market, you buy. Remember, product market, we're buying our goods and services there. You go to the product market, you increase aggregate demand in the product market. Labor, you find it in a factor market. You go rent this labor, this person is working for you, is receiving income. When they receive income, they are able, this labor, when they receive income now, they are able to consume more goods and services. This may lead to what? Inflation, increase in prices, because the demand now becomes more. If aggregate demand increase at a faster rate than aggregate supply, prices will increase. So what will follow when demand increases faster, the prices of the supplier will increase. Let's look at government spending. An increase in government spending without an increase in productivity will lead to inflation. So one of the things to dampen the overheating economy is using government spending, by decreasing government spending so that there's not much money in circulation. When we decrease government spending, we're not saying we're going to take the salary of a policeman, of a teacher, or we're going to take the grants money from our marginalized people, for example, child grants. But then we're saying government can pause some of the infrastructural developments. So by freezing those projects, it means that government spending will be less. So there won't be too much money in circulation. If increase in government spending are financed by borrowing from financial institutions, large sums of money are placed into the circulation. The demand in the economy. So this will do what? If there's too much money that is spent from borrowing, it means that there's no production that is happening. We just receive money. So by receiving this large money, it will lead to what? Demand increasing. So it leads to the capacity of demand increasing, because of the sum of money in circulation is more now. So if there is government spending, however, the government is spending either through borrowing or whatsoever, when the government spend, it will do what? It will increase the aggregate demand. That's why we advocate for what? The government to spend when we are at trough, not when we are at peak. When we are at peak, we do what? We decrease government spending. When we are at trough, we increase government spending. So government spend through these three channels. Infrastructure. Government may embark in capital projects such as building roads, housing, water. Then government can have consumption expenditure. Remember, government also, they need to consume, to buy some things. Government will at times increase expenditure on education, healthcare, buying those textbooks for children to learn with at school. It's consumption expenditure. And then you have social spending. Government sometimes feel they have to spend, more especially when it comes to trying to get this project going on your infrastructure and whatsoever. They will be creating jobs, and that will be reducing poverty. So in order for them to do that, they need to spend. Public work programs, for example, your EPWP project, they may spend on that training people for certain job or skill, then hiring them. They are spending. Such expenditure leads to inflation because they add to aggregate demand without adding anything to aggregate supply. So government spending on those three channels, then it can lead to too much demand than supply. Right? Export. We mentioned that export sometimes can create inflation because now, instead of only accommodating, let's take your target market in South Africa, it's about 10 million people in South Africa buying the same product. And then now there's international trade, there's additional 40,000 people from abroad who are buying. Then it means that there's more aggregate demand than the supply. So export also can result in inflation because export also increase the aggregate demand. Foreign growth. Growth of economies of trading partners countries may create a demand for a variety of local produce goods. So if there's countries next to us or our trading partners, they are becoming more developed, they are having more money, then they start buying from our market. It creates what? More demand for local markets. The sale of export bring money into the country, demand increase without corresponding increase in the supply, resulting in price increase. So if there's growth in the economies, and what our trading partner, meaning other countries that we are trading with, they become more successful. Now they start demanding more from us. That will only do what? Increase our aggregate demand without increasing our supply. That will lead us to increase in prices. Commodities demand. The world demand for commodities expands, and contracts like business cycle do. The demand for these commodities can increase or decrease, just like it's happening in the business cycle. During an expansionary period, foreign demand increases, and this leads to greater volume of export. Right? So greater volume of export will increase price because now the demand is increasing. The income earned from this export adds to our aggregate demand, and price will increase. So grade 12, we looked at ways. We looked at what? Ways of increasing demand. Demand can be increased by all the participants: consumers, consumers, which is your household, businesses, government, and exports. Those are the causes of demand pull inflation. However, if their consumption is increasing, why is it increasing? Because declining savings, because tax reduction. So those will cause what? Them to have more money, and then when they have more money, aggregate demand will increase. Right? I just want to put this here on it before we move to cost push. Let's look at this in a graph, grade 12. So this is your quantity, this is your prices, then you have your demand curve, your supply curve. So when there's a decline in savings, it means people are buying more. Or when there's a reduction in taxation, or if they have access to credit, it means demand is more. When demand increases, it shifts to the right. Anything that increases shift to the right. So demand will shift. Supplier in the short run does not shift. Just because people are having money doesn't mean you quickly go to the warehouse and buy more stock, right? So demand shift to D1, 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 right? So the original price was here at P. Now when the E was here. Now when the demand shift to the right, because people have access to credit, people are buying because they are no longer saving. People are buying because taxation is low, and the disposable income is high, the new price will be here. This is your E1, right? And then the prices will be up P1. So what is happening here? Prices increased from P to P1. So it causes inflation in that way. So you can look at that in that way to say when the aggregate demand increases and the supply remains the same. Remember, the explanation of demand pool is that the aggregate demand increases further than the supply. Right now, we can move to cost push inflation. So the cost push inflation, we're looking at producers having high cost. High cost. Now we're going to look at the factors of production, the cost of producing whatever that you need to produce, being the reason we are having inflation. When you look at South Africa, you see that the unemployment rate is high. So it means you do not have money. So there's not much money chasing few goods. People don't have money. The interest rate has been increasing over the past 2 years, so high that people now are struggling to even pay their debts. So it means that demanders, consumers don't have that much money. So the inflation that you may see is not because it's pulled up by consumers, but then it may be pushed by what? Producers. When it's hard for them to produce, they charge high price. For example, petrol, you need crude oil. When there's war between your Ukraine or whatsoever, it creates a situation where they cannot get it easy. And then if the price of the crude oil is expensive, then the price of goods and services will be high. So you're looting, when people are looting, all those things, they affect producers. So those things we can look at, all the exogenous things like natural disasters, that has been floods that had been happening in Durban and other cities in the country. So those are the exogenous factors that may affect producers not to produce at a cheaper cost anymore. So all of those things can push the prices up. Right, so cost push inflation occurs when the cost of production increase, leading producers to raise price to maintain their profit. So the cost of production is increasing. This will lead producers in raising price in order to still have profit. We operate to make profit. So businesses operate to maximize profit. So if the cost of production is high, you are going to raise prices to maintain your profit. This type of inflation is often caused by factors such as rising wages, your employee demanding more wage because the standard of living, the cost of living is too high. They demand more wages, increased raw material costs, or higher taxes by the government. So these are the examples that may increase the cost push inflation. They have to pay their employee more money than before. Their raw material is now expensive. Government is increasing the company taxes, so they have to pay more tax to the government, which pushes the overall production cost and contribute to higher consumer prices. Wages as one of the causes of cost push inflation. Wages increase that are higher than the productivity cause a cost increase for producers. So remuneration per worker. Remuneration per worker must not increase further than their productivity. And that's why we calculate productivity as part of our indicators. And we mentioned when we did indicators that if the productivity level is not increasing, however, the remuneration per worker is increasing, it will lead to inflation. So if your employee are bargaining for more wage, their productivity is not increasing, then this can increase the cost of production for producers. Single most important cost item in an economy. So most of the money that the producers are spending on, they are spending on labor. We also see that when we calculate our GDP at income method, compensation of employee is usually higher than any other factor of production there. So most of the money is going to the labor. It contributes to almost 50% of the value added prices, right? And then we have key inputs. So key inputs, you look at your materials that you are using to produce. when the price of imported key inputs increases, the domestic cost of production increase. If our key inputs are being imported from abroad at a high price, then our domestic prices will also increase. Producer recover this cost by increasing the prices of the product. So if your key inputs are expensive, for you to recover the costs that are more expensive, then you do what? You increase the price of your goods. Right. Profit measures. When businesses push their profit measures, they increase the cost of production and the price that the consumer has to pay. So in order for them to get more profit margin, if their profit markup was 40%, they want to shift it to 50% as a profit markup, then that will increase the cost of production to produce more, and then this may lead to what? Consumers having to pay more so that they can have this profit that they want. This is because manufacturers recover their higher prices, they have to pay by increasing the prices. So the price here are pushed by what? By producers wanting more profit. Then we have productivity. If various factors of production become less productive while still receiving the same remuneration, the cost of producing each unit will increase. So anything that has to be used in the production processes, if it becomes less productive, can be a machine that we use is now old, is worn out, cannot produce as fast as it used to be. Then it produces slow, then that may result in production that is low. There's less things that are produced, and then they need to make money still. Then they will increase prices. It can be labor, people who are working, they are not being skilled, they are not trained. They're still using older ways to produce, then they are still receiving the same remuneration. However, they are not being productive, then that may increase prices because the cost of producing each unit will increase. Now they need to spend much in producing each unit. That will do what? Will increase the prices of the good that is being produced then because of less productivity. Exchange rate depreciation. So if our currency depreciate, it directly affects producers who are importing their key inputs. If they have to buy their raw material from abroad and our currency is depreciating, it means they need more money now to buy the same quantity of things that they used to buy. If rand to dollar depreciate from 18 rand to 20 rand, it means that to buy $1 now, it costs you 20 rand. So the price of the product remains to be what? $5. However, now you are not going to pay 18 times 5. You are going to pay 20 times 5. It means now it becomes expensive to buy the same product because your currency has lost value. Remember, a currency that depreciates is when the currency loses its value due to the market force. If rands depreciate against the major currencies, import from such countries will be more expensive. And what imports are we talking about here? Because we are talking about a producer. We're talking of key inputs, things that we need from abroad to produce. If we have to buy them expensive, we are going to produce also at an expensive price, then our prices of goods will also increase. Producers have to pay more money for the same quantity of products than before. They often shift the increase to the consumers because they have to pay more to produce. Now they increase the prices to consumers. This it happens. It doesn't even have to be only on the exchange rate. It happens that producers, when they start feeling that they are using much money to produce, they increase the prices. That's why when you find that some companies will be investigated if the government they fit the competition policies or competition acts and whatsoever, detail that something is not going right there, they will be investigated for increasing price. But they always have these reasons because of drought, for example, why maize meal is expensive because of drought, and all those things will be taken into consideration when they are increasing their prices. Let's look at just the exchange rate depreciation for now. So when the rand depreciate against other currencies, it means import becomes expensive. When import is expensive, then they shift this toward to consumers. Natural disasters. Disasters such as floods, droughts affect the cost of production negatively. Obviously, they are affecting producers. Then it becomes difficult. Can be agricultural production when talking about drought and floods can affect agricultural production. Then that will affect their production negatively, meaning the cost of production will have to increase in them fixing the damage that are caused by the natural disasters. Food prices are one of the most volatile prices items as a result of the effect of weather changes. This may result in food prices increasing because of natural disasters. Let's look at the chicken flu that driven the egg prices so high. So are those things that can lead to food prices increase natural disasters? Those are your exogenous factors that may affect producers to produce at a high price. Theft by employee or shoplifting. Many businesses make provision for losses caused by the theft by employee shoplifting, which increase the price of goods and services. Sometimes if your stock taking, you check now you're losing too much stock, then you do what you increase price with what you are left with, you charge it higher price so that you can make the same profit. Sometimes what you do, the cost of installing security measures increase the input cost. Now you need to hire a person to stand by the door to search people who are going out. That person you need to pay. So it's a cost of production. Installing security measures like putting cameras, and then they need to be maintained as well. That is what it is, the cost of producing as well, because it increases the cost in the production, even though it's not directly involved with you producing. However, it's the cost of your business as well. So when you increase the cost in the business, you are going to increase the prices of goods that you are producing there. Right. So grade 12, we looked at both demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. Right. Before we move to the activity, let's just have a graph here to explain the cost push. So cost is about supply. So we're going to do the same thing. You have quantity, you have prices, you have your demand, you have your supplier. Now, in this situation, the supplier shifts. It means because there's a natural disaster, people are stealing from you, you need to pay high wages, the supply is not going to increase. The supply is going to decrease. Anything that decreases, it shifts to the left. So it moves to the left to S1. S1. So it moves from this from P here toward E1 to P here, P1. What is happening? The price now is pushed. This is the push. The cost pushed the inflation high. So this time is because of what? The suppliers, the producers, not the consumers. The first one, the demand was the one that was shifting. Right now, what is shifting is what? Is the producers' price that are being high. And then now they need to charge more prices. Right, let's look at our activities. The first question there, it says explain how wages and exchange rate can lead to cost push inflation. So how does wages and exchange rate lead to cost push inflation? How would you advise the Minister of Finance to cap or to reduce inflation? Remember, our Minister of Finance work with what? The fiscal policy. So this is an example of a middle order question that you find in your point 4 question 3.4, 4.4. This is the question. The how question is a higher order, the one that you find in your 0.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5. I'm going to give you grade 12 to answer these two questions, only 10 minutes. Then we'll look at the possible answers. Right, your 10 minutes is done. Let's look at the answers. Explain how wages and exchange rate can lead to cost push inflation. So you need 2 points for wages. You need 2 points for exchange rate to maximize the mark that is allocated. Trade unions or workers is successful in negotiating better wages. The wages will increase, leading to an increase in production. So if they have bargained for more wages and they were successful in bargaining for more wages, it means that it will increase the production cost. Businesses will increase the selling price to compensate for the higher input cost. So to compensate for that, then they will do what? They will increase their prices. Exchange rate, if it depreciates, if rands depreciate against the dollar, all the imported goods and services become more expensive. We've spoken about our key inputs from abroad. They become more expensive. It costs more to import goods. This will increase the price of imported goods. Let's look at question number 2. How would you advise a Minister of Finance to curb inflation? Minister of Finance will only use government expenditure and taxation because those are the instrument of fiscal policy. Increased direct taxes will lead to decrease, and increased indirect taxes will lead to a decrease in disposable income. Therefore, this will lead to a decrease in spending and inflation. So you advise the minister to increase taxes. Direct taxes, that is your progressive tax, pay as you earn. Increase in indirect taxation, such as VAT, will lead to increase in the price and demand will decrease. When demand decreases, then there won't be more inflation. A decrease in government spending will lead to less money injected in the economy. So you can also advise to decrease government expenditure. This will lead to a decrease in the total demand of goods and services. Therefore, inflation will decrease. Grade 12, the government it's easy for the government to curb inflation when it comes to the demand pull inflation, because they are able to increase taxation, reduce government expenditure. Not as much when it comes to the cost push inflation. It becomes a bit difficult for them to reduce the inflation that was caused by the cost push. They can use the Reserve Bank can use the interest rate. Also, the Reserve Bank or the monetary policy, their target more is on the demand pull. However, they can also assist in the cost push inflation. By increasing interest rate, it also attracts foreign direct investors. So when the foreign direct investors are coming into the economy and they are producing, it means that there will be more goods produced. So supply, it won't shift to the left, like the graph that I've shown you, where supply is shifting to the left and price increases. When there's more investment, supply will shift to the right. So meaning there will be more goods produced that can curb the inflation that is taking place. For your homework, grade 12, you are going to answer this for 10 marks. This is an example of an additional part on your essay. How successful have monetary policy measures been in combating demand pull inflation? So you can use all the measures that we have under the monetary policy, your money supply, your interest rate, open market transaction, all of them. You can use them to answer this 10 mark. However, you are not discussing them. You are telling us how successful is the monetary policy measures in combating, in curbing or in decreasing the demand pull inflation in South Africa. That is your homework. Right, to wrap up our lesson for today, um, inflation typically arises from either demand pull factors, which is your demand pull inflation that we spoke about, where aggregate is more than aggregate demand exceed the economy's productivity capacity, meaning aggregate demand is more than aggregate supplier, leading to price increase. Or it can come from what factors such as the rising cost of production, which necessitate high prices to maintain profitability by the businesses. So what we have done today, we looked at what is more important that you're taking home today is that we have the demand pull inflation caused by aggregate demand increasing more than the aggregate supplier, and then you have the cost push inflation that is caused by the rising cost of production that lead producers in charging high prices. The preview of the next lesson. The next lesson will be looking at the consequence of inflation, and we'll be discussing that in detail, meaning it's a long question. Thank you so much, Grade 12, for joining in today's class. I'll see you next time.